His sensory system, he's a little bit more what I would call primary, eye dependent on interpretations, and I wouldn't consider it to be super rapid. And it's working, but as far as the extension from his body, it's not quite as far, and you'll see the condensed pressure in his body as he's interpreting things while he's moving. So matching the physical timing with the approach is going to be very, very important for the rider. So when you have a horse that needs a little bit of help in that timing, from the psychology and the sensory to the body, the rider has to be highly in tune with the needs before the horse knows that he needs them. Because you need to circumvent that. What you want to do is help bridge that gap. So the horse doesn't think he has to bridge the gap himself. Because if he does, he's going to lose focus, and the sensory lead change will not be efficient. Now he's using his ear feel for survey, but he's going to be more reliant on his visual aspect for interpretation. You need to be mindful of that when you're making maneuvers through a course, that you're going to need to be part of that sensory system for him and project forward so that your body naturally projects itself forward so that he can follow suit. He's going to need a little assistance following the lead changes and making the transitions. That was good because his physical speed slowed down. He made it. There we go. He's like, oh, this is fun. I want to watch that coming down. It's great. Now you can see in his body, when he's transitioning from point to point, he naturally alters his rhythms to adjust. And of course that's what you want, but it alters in here. Athletic. Can you do me a favor? Can you just take him up to the end and then walk him down in between and right to me? I want to see where we are on our interpretation distance from his body. Do a little test.
Where do you want me to be?
Wherever you want to be. Be on the
Not
side.
in the way?
No. Don't be in the way. Don't be purposely noticed. Yeah, just bring him right here. I want to see what we got. Now you'll notice something in horses, that when there becomes a separation in what the body and mind are doing, and he's focusing on, sometimes a horse will lose body control, not because they're a bad horse, but because they're trying to focus mentally on a target. And sometimes they aren't able to adjust the speed. They kind of lose track of themselves. And what happens is they'll be so focused on something and their body either kind of rushes up. You know, you have a horse sometimes will just rush up on something and you're like, they're not really rushing up on something. They didn't manage the physical speed through the sensory system and the psychology, because they're out here and they're kind of trying to catch up, but there's separation between the two. When there's good continuity between the two, you have really efficient and controlled physical motion. It can still be fast and it can be rapid, but there's a difference between reckless movement and controlled movement. And a slight hint of the body starting to get a little bit of catching up to the mind when he's approaching, but he didn't crash, and he did manage it, so it's just what it is. But you can tell the rhythms are a little bit different here. And his physical speed wasn't altered according to the psychological speed of interpretation. So he'll come in and it'll look a little bit fast. It'll feel a little bit like, is he going to stop? You know, and he will stop, but it might be after he walks over top of me, which is okay, it happens. But what you're looking for is that control. So that's one area that we would work on with his sensory system to help him maintain some body control. Part of that is when a horse is having some issues interpreting stimulus on the obliques or in their rear, and they're super focused in one aspect, the rest of the world goes away. And the rest of the world doesn't matter for a period of time, and that also includes their bodies themselves. You've ever been so focused on something, and someone can just scare you because you knew they were there or you knew someone was in the room, but you became so focused on a point or trying to figure something out that everything else is tuned out. Well, that happens a lot with horses who are very, very strong and very dependent on one sensory aspect. And you're going to get a little bit of occasional reckless body language, or you're going to get horses that all of a sudden spook, seem like for no reason, where there's always a reason. Things just don't happen. And we'll go ahead and go on again. And I always get questions like, do I have a problem horse? Or do I not have a problem horse? And I don't think there's problems as much as there's this issue to deal with. It's uncovering what those issues are, and it can be very small things. Once you identify what's going on and why it's happening, it becomes easier to manage, at least to have a game plan to help deal with it. You can clearly see that this is a horse that doesn't have emotional stress on what he's doing. He enjoys what he's doing. So it's not an emotional stress issue. There's oftentimes horses that you have to identify whether it's a sensory issue, a learned behavior, or just an emotional and a stress problem, like going into competition or going into work, they get all stressed out. And there's the way you handle each different thing is very individual. Now we did that. Can we do that walk again when we check the assimilation? Yeah, walk down to me, please. Yes. Now it's very interesting if you see from he's picking me up, he's identifying the distant stimulus target, which is me, at pretty far away. He's identifying that there is a target there. He's not necessarily interpreting that target until he gets a little bit closer. So what's happening is he's zeroing in on me, so he's seeing your target, which is fantastic. He's also coming, and while he's moving, his speed stays the same. As he gets closer, he'll slightly speed up a little bit. And what's happening is when you see speed up in the horse like that while they're coming to a target, that's actually separation between the body and the mind, because now you have a little bit of this and it starts to get a little loose. Looseness can be in a racehorse that is floating out or not being able to go in a straight line. In a test like this coming forward, he's holding a straight line, but it's starting to move a little rapid. And the further space you get between the interpretation process and the body, the faster the body tends to move. And he gets to within 5 feet, he's like, oh, it's you. I knew you were there. And that's all well and good, that's fine. It's just about adjusting the speed. Now, can you feel him at all? Can you feel that rhythm when he's coming toward you? Now, this time I want you to do it, please. And you now take control of the speed and decelerate. Now we're going to do a deceleration process to me as a target so I can kind of monitor what's going on. You see how that works. We're going to give him, because now what's happening is what you want to do is, if he's unable to really control that himself on his own naturally, that's fine, we can work with that. Now as a rider, you want to give him, excuse me, a little bit of assistance and be part of that sensory process now for him. A good rider knows where to bridge the gaps and can do it by feel.
We've been told the birds are too loud.
The birds are too loud?
The birds are too loud.
I can't do nothing about the birds. What was nice about that was, it was nice. What we had here was he transferred his emotional energy now to Aliya.
Yep.
And you could see that as he approached, he did the same psychological process. However, he had the assistance of a good guide. And when he got closer to me, he checked in with you. Because he wanted to make sure that, okay, you're helping me. Is this where we're stopping? I think this is where we're stopping, but this is what we're doing. Now, and nice little release. There's no internal stress there. This is not bothering him. So this is not an emotional problem that we're dealing with. This is just a sensory little thing that we're dealing with. There's a difference. And it's just fine. But now we found a way to bridge that gap by the assistance of the rider. And that's what you have to do. You have to be able to identify these things that are going on and then adjust. Sometimes the rider has to help adjust. You're part of the environment. You're part of the team, the synergy. So he has a lot of good skills and maybe a little gap in one of the sensory aspects, and that's where you come in. So go ahead and go around again. He was much more relaxed after his approach. On his own approach to me, he was trying a little bit of overflow residual stress. With the assistance of Aliya on the approach during the interpretation process, the internal stress was minimized. And when you do that, you start to build confidence in your horse, and you start to build confidence in what's going on. And here's the thing you have to watch out for. Left unchecked, a small little thing like this, left undealt with and left misunderstood or undiagnosed, can start to create a psychosomatic issue. And over time, what you'll find is that if he can't depend on you to bridge that gap, he's going to become dependent on other things. And sometimes it's a herd dependency to fill that gap. Sometimes it's an environmental dependency that's not in the herd. Sometimes it's the way his body moves. Sometimes he'll want to veer away, do things quirky. It's part of the filtering process. So the key thing is to identify what's going on here, understand it, and manage it. If you have to bridge that gap, what you want to do is, if he's going to have a tendency to have a dependency to fill the gap, let it be you. Mm-hmm. Let it be you. Because at least you have teamwork going on. And when you have that going on as a good rider like yourself, you can still move forward. You can take advantage of the optimizing the physical talent. You may have a horse that has a lot of physical talent, and it has maybe a small gap in the sensory sequence. But if you can bridge that gap, you can do what he can't do on his own. On his own, he would be unable to fully optimize the physical ability. Once you understand what's going on, and you put a little nurturing plan in place, and bridge the psychology yourself with the sensory system, you can begin to optimize the physical talent. And you may not become a superstar, but the object is, not every horse, just like every kid, is not always going to get a trophy. That's not real life. But in real life, you just want them to be the best at who they can be. And part of my job is to identify who they are and work with you to allow them to become the best at whatever they can be. Because then you have a happy horse. And when you have a happy horse and a good team, it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's just fun. And everybody's good. So you can go around one more time and... Then I'm going to give you a little trick, well not trick, a little exercise to do for the obliques. Now come back around, and when you get, and just come right here for a minute, please. So we're going to create a little exercise here. We're going to create a little sensory dual exercise to help him begin to adjust to getting stronger on the oblique sensory side. So at least trust the oblique sensory and trust you. Instead of approaching now into the deceleration in the center of the jump, This time we're going to go, I want you just to walk up to here. And what I want to do is you need to split the sensory aspect. So you need to have open space on one side, the obstacle on this side. You want to split it. What's going to happen is you're going to, by nature, require the horse to blend the two fields of vision and to make a choice of how to manage it. You're then going to help that choice. You're going to stand there. And you're going to help the choice by go ahead and going around this way. You see a little uncertainty right there, but he'll get it. Now this time, let's go ahead around and then do the whole approach in one sequence. Approach and go around it. What we're doing here is we're requiring the sensory field by manipulating the environment in a way to have to do a sensory transition. But it's going to be assisted by Aliya. That was fine. Little tiny wins are big wins for the psychology. Now we can do the same thing on the other side. We want to make sure we keep it balanced. Everyone knows the two sides of every horse. We want the sensory field to be the handshake, left to right. And this time, go ahead and stop at that, and then do the same, to walk around. And then the second pass, we'll do it in one sequence. It's like, what are we doing? Crazy man with a cowboy hat. And then exercise again in one sequence. And something as simple as that is you can do a lot of psychological and sensory nurturing. Even when the horse is cooling down, when the horse is convalescing, you can still do sensory things because psychological learning is not indicative of physical movement. It's not managed by how fast the horse is moving. Psychology is separate from the physical motion, but it controls it. It's the operating system, like I said before. And so you can do small things like this, even when you're tired or you've already worked out or you're not really doing the work that day, but you can still do sensory training. Small things like that. It seems very, very simple, but you're doing exercises. You're keeping the mind fresh. It's like someone who reads a book every day or reads something every day. It keeps your mind going. And what we want to do is we want to practice this. What we're doing is practicing sensory lead changes. And we know he doesn't do them efficiently by himself. Doesn't mean it's a bad horse or a problem horse. We're just going to manage it. And I always like to think in the moment. And for me, there is no one way of doing anything. Every horse, as we all know, is individual. Personality manages performance. And patterns of behavior translate to patterns of motion. So in our evaluation process, one of the first things we do is to identify the patterns of behavior and to translate that to the probable patterns of motion, especially in a young horse, if we're looking at a sale or for a pre-purchase. It's very, very important. Once you know what that is your base level. Everything is founded upon that. The horse's ability to learn is managed by its ability to understand and comprehend. That ability is managed by the interpretation process. The interpretation process is then managed by the identification process and so on and so forth. There's this long sequence that has to happen for body control and efficiency.
We have a question online.
Okay.
They want to know if that type of exercise can be used on the ground, like to work that stuff.
Yes. You don't have to be in saddle. But you have to be a little careful sometimes when you're doing stuff on the ground. If you have a horse that's got big gaps in the sensory system, and you may need to walk them through an obstacle course. You can actually do some cool things in creating something as simple as a ground walking obstacle course. And for things for them to step over. I mean, we do these things, but sometimes we don't do them enough. We don't add enough challenges. You want to increase. If you think of an accordion or a slinky, and you stretch it out, and as you begin to push it together, you have one layer, the next layer, the next layer, the next layer, and you want to build upon each thing. The problem is, from a psychological standpoint, if you go past something too quickly before you really know it's understood and managed, now you instead of layering a good experience, you've layered an issue, and that issue can pop up at the most inopportune time, most likely. And increased stress. And if you think about stress in the psychology, think about a balloon. Like there's a balloon here. And in that balloon, there's only so much air. And an even-shaped balloon is an evenly distributed energy to the sensory system. If you have a pressure point someplace in there, and a pressure point in the sensory system means an inefficiency in interpretation. It's condensed. So now you shift the pressure in the balloon to another aspect. In other words, if I can't interpret with my ears, I'm going to shift the pressure to my vision. Hence, I'm going to look. I'm going to depend upon that. Now the balloon is pressured off. A lot of times people ask me about equipment, especially in racehorses, blinkers, shadow rolls, things of that nature. Well, it's a double-edged sword sometimes, and I never advocate that right away until I give the horse an opportunity to learn. And what you're doing is, sometimes you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul, because you're stealing energy from one spot and pushing it into another. Well, you can get a burst of energy sometimes, but you can be fooled by that, because that can also create bad residual behavior patterns after. It can become a dependency. So I never want to do anything to my horse that they're not going to live with every single day. Because here's the thing to think about. This is the psychology that runs their entire life, day to day, in and out, nighttime, daytime, in the field, in the stall, in the show ring. So you have to understand that the psychological rhythms, you don't turn that off. These are never turned off. These are always running at speed to keep him safe in his environments. The body can rest, but there's no off switch for the psychology. So if we don't focus our training and understanding here, we can end up with a lot of residual problems, or we can end up with an underachiever. We can become very disappointed and very frustrated. And you might go through 5 trainers and 6 vets, and no one can find anything, and you can't figure it out, so they just throw up their hands and say, well, it's a bad horse. I don't agree with that. Because sometimes you got to remember that the smallest little issues in the sensory field, in the herd dynamic, can create the biggest problems in performance. And like I said, they can go unnoticed unless you put them in pressure. And sometimes you're like, oh, they fall under pressure, they can't handle the pressure. Well, there's reasons behind that. Is it a behavioral thing? Is it a sensory thing? If it's a sensory thing, we can begin to work with it and try to manage it, to soften it. Again, a supple mind is a supple body.